John asked us to give some of our own personal quest or struggle or background to this. I don't know. Thing is, I was actually raised by wolves, and it was not a happy childhood and missed out on a lot of things. They taught me a lot, but when it got to adolescence and I didn't want to be a wolf anymore, and all they taught me was useless. So ever since I've been trying to figure out, so as not to miss out on anymore, what human life is all about, and psychology is good for that. Figure out how the parts fit together, and to do that, I have to be something of a generalist because I got to know what's in all the parts. And well, today, to be a generalist, you got to be fast because so little time, so much to know. So I go from area to area trying to size things up. And one thing I've learned is, caring slows you down. It gets in the way. And these are a lot of topics that people care very much about and have strong opinions. And, well, I'd rather just, not care. I said I aspire not to have political views. And all that stuff just slows it down. Going from area to area, I notice some patterns that come up over and over again. One thing is become increasingly skeptical of reductionism, and it seems like reductionism is always proved wrong in the long run. And in psychology we had behaviorism and Freudian psychoanalysis. All these, they're going to explain everything, and well, they explain some things, and we learned a lot. And I think to some extent we're now going through this with the brain and evolution. It's going to explain everything. Well, we're certainly going to learn a lot, and have already, but we need to be attentive to continuities that we're the same as animals, and also perhaps the ways in which we're different in order to put them together. Beyond the reductionism, another thing is motivation tends to be undervalued compared to cognition and ability. And a third point is we tend to have the individual focus, so we tend to neglect and undervalue the interpersonal dimension. That things are perhaps more interpersonal than we typically incline to think. So that said, in terms of trying to understand human nature, well, and morality too, nature and culture certainly combine in some ways to do this. And I put these together in a slightly different way. It's not nature's here and culture's here, and they're both pulling us in different directions. Rather, nature made us for culture. I became convinced that the distinctively human aspects of psychology, the human aspects of evolution, were adaptations to enable us to have this new and better kind of social life. Culture is our biological strategy. It's a new, better way of relating to each other based on shared information and division of labor, interlocking roles, and things like that. And it's worked. It's how we solve the problems of survival and reproduction. And it's worked pretty well for us in that regard. And so the distinctively human traits are ones often there to make this new kind of social life work. Now, where does this leave us with morality? Well, it's not so much purpose to facilitate individual salvation or perfection or whatever, quoting McIntyre earlier, but rather, morality is the set of rules to enable people to live together. It serves the purpose of making the culture work, as culture depends on cooperating with each other. There's trust, shared assumptions, things like that. And although nature and culture in that sense are working together, there are some conflicts. In particular, nature's made us, at least in a very basic way, selfish, and the brain is selfish, and maybe it's the selfish gene, not the selfish individual or whatever, but there's still a natural selfishness, whereas culture needs people to overcome this to some degree, because you have to cooperate with others and do things that are detrimental to your short-term and even your long-term self-interest. So you have to keep your promises, you have to wait your turn, pay your taxes, even maybe send your offspring into battle to risk their lives. Goes against the grain biologically. But these are the sorts of things that morality promotes to try to get people to overcome their natural selfish impulses to do things that make the system work, and that benefits everyone in the long run. And so and morality does this, and of course laws too. We haven't said that much about laws, but laws regulate behavior in a lot of the same ways that morality does. They prescribe a lot of the same things, restraining self-interest to do what's better for the group, and so that the system will operate effectively. And there's a big difference between the laws and morals, which is mainly in the force they use. why people have to do moral things in practice is because of concern with their reputation, and it's based therefore on long-term relationships. And so if you cheat someone you're living next door to for the rest of your life, they're going to know that, and other people are going to know that, and you'll be punished, and it will compromise your outcomes long term. As society got larger and more complex, moved to more stranger interactions, laws have to step in to take their place, because you can cheat a stranger who you'll never see again and get away with it. Anyway, this you're seeing here the neglected interpersonal dimension in understanding morality, depending on relationships, and it's there again to regulate interpersonal behavior so that people cooperate, so that the system can work. Now, some of the traits then to enable people to overcome these selfish impulses so as to do what's best for the group and the system and so on. Among those, self-regulation, and it's what I think I got invited here, is I have a history of doing research on self-regulation, self-control. This is the essence of self-regulation, is to override one response so that you can do something else, usually something that's more desirable, better either in the long run or better for the group. And so we've called self-control the moral muscle, and I want to unpack that and comment on both parts. It's moral. Self-control is moral in the sense that it enables you to do these morally good things that are sometimes detrimental to self-interest. So if you get lists of morals, whether it's the 7 deadly sins or the 10 commandments or lists of virtues and so on, they're mostly about self-control, and you can really see self-control and central to them. So the 7 deadly sins of gluttony and greed and try to remember them all here. But again, they're mostly self-control failures, and the virtues are exemplary acts of self-control. So that's the moral part. It's a capacity to enable us to do these moral actions, which are good for the group, even though overcoming at least short-term self-interest. The muscle part, that's kind of emerged from our lab work, independent of any moral thing, that as people, it seems to be a limited capacity to exert self-control that gets used up. And so like a muscle, it gets tired. And so we found in many studies, after people will do some kind of self-control task, then they go to a different context with completely different self-control demands, they do worse on it, as if they used a muscle and it got tired there. So it's a limited resource that gets exhausted there. And the muscle, there are other aspects of the muscle analogy. If you exercise it regularly, you get stronger. You don't want people to say, well, if self-control or morality is a limited capacity, I'm never going to do any exert self-control because I don't want to waste it. No. You should exert it regularly. It will make you stronger and greater capacity to do things. And certainly then we find that when people have exerted this muscle and it's tired, so to speak, or when they've depleted, ego depletion is a term for it, depleted their resources, then behavior drifts toward being less moral. So we found that people are perhaps more gratuitously aggressive towards somebody else after they've exerted self-control and used up some of their resources. A study on cheating and stealing a couple of years ago, we published, people had to type up an essay about what they had done recently, either not using letters with the word A or not using letters with the word containing the word X. And there are a lot more words containing A than X. And so when you're trying to make up the sentence and you keep realizing, oh, there's an A in that word, and you have to override it. And so it's uses self-control to keep overriding one response and coming up with another that depletes people's resources. Afterwards, then they went to supposedly another experiment where they're taking an arithmetic test, and they're being paid for the number of ones they get right, either scoring it themselves or the experimenter scored it for them. And they all got about the same number right, except the depleted people who scored their own. They suddenly claimed to get a whole lot more right. So it's not plausible they were actually getting smarter by virtue of having typed, not using the words with the letter A in them. Because, when the experimenter scored them, he couldn't find any difference. They got about the same number right. But suddenly if nobody was checking and their answer sheet was shredded and they said, I got 6 correct, then suddenly they got they got more correct. So it suggests increase in lying, cheating, and effectively stealing money from the experiment. And there's some other things too. Depleted people more likely to engage in sexual misbehavior and so on. So moral behavior does seem to go down when people have depleted their moral muscle capacity. More recently, we're working with Mark Hauser on seeing if depletion changes how people make moral judgments of others. That's proving a little bit more slippery. But again, this kind of process is geared toward regulating your behavior more than you're thinking about others. So it's not surprising that it shows up like there. A couple other things we found relevant here: the choice seems to deplete the same as self-control. This is the same resource. So we have people, say, make a lot of choices about which of these two products would you buy and so on. Afterwards, then their self-control is damaged too, so making choices uses it. And it seems to be tied into some physiological processes. We found changes with the glucose levels in the bloodstream. And so something about doing these advanced kinds of self-control acts uses up this resource and depletes self-control in the bloodstream. If you give people a drink, our favorite manipulation, we give them lemonade mixed with sugar or with Splenda. And Splenda, they still act bad, but they got sugar in there. That gives a quick dose of glucose to the bloodstream, and suddenly their behavior is more self-controlled and in some cases more moral, making more rational decisions, and so forth. And conversely, too, if they're depleted from self-control, then their choice processes change to be more shallow, and so forth. In terms of self-regulation plus choice, I mean, start now to think that this same capacity is used for the same resource used for choosing and for self-control. And then maybe a couple other things as well, if some data on initiative. So instead of talking about it in terms of regulatory depletion, we're trying to come up with a bigger term, and that's how we got to talking about free will and talking to Josh and others about some work that can be tied in there. Now, free will is another of these topics where there's people are very emotional on both sides and a lot of passionate feelings, and I don't really want to deal with that. And let me try to forestall some by saying, I'm trying to develop a scientific theory of free will as nothing supernatural, nothing that's non-causal in there, but understand the processes by which people make these. And again, I think there is a social reality corresponding to this, and certainly behaving with self-control, behaving morally, making moral choices and making certain kinds of choices. These are the things we will associate with free will. And so in that sense, there's a real phenomenon there. Whether it deserves the term free will depends kind of on this or that definition. And I would say I'm surprised. I've been to this conference. I was at this conference in Israel with Paul there. And yet nobody mentioned free will really in either thing. And it seems to me that this is a natural way to build this theory and extend it. So part of my interest in this topic, morality assumes that the person can do different things. And it says, well, this thing is good and that thing is bad. So it's a way to persuade you to do one thing rather than the other. So, and likewise, moral judgments about people are based on the assumption that the person could have, and essentially the moral judgment says the person should have acted differently. And in legal judgments, of course, very much the same sort of thing. So I see my well ahead of schedule here. Let me comment on a couple other points. In terms of evolution and morality, it's a recent column by David Barish saying, well, there's a fairness instinct we can look in other animals. Cited the Frans de Waal study in which monkeys were mad if they saw another monkey getting a nicer treat for the same action. They said, well, look, I think there's a fairness instinct. And again, I'm skeptical of the reductionism, and we need to look at the continuities and also the differences. To call that a fairness instinct seems a little overstated. It's a step in that direction, but it's not that impressive. If you have two dogs and you give one of them a treat, the other looks at you like, what about me? But what you don't see is the over-benefited one complain. The other dog doesn't say, well, I'll share my biscuit with you, or I'm not going to eat mine until, and many of the arguments today come in those terms. And so I think if we want to see a fairness instinct, we need to see both the over-benefited and the under-benefited one complain. And perhaps even more, to get to what the human, you have to have a third party saying, no, you got more than this one, and that's not fair, and intervening to redistribute, as happens over the world. In the Israel conference, Paul Bloom was talking about moral progress, too, and Steven Pinker, a recent book on that as well, I guess. And yes, the world's gotten to be a better place, but again, I'm not sure that we're morally better people. The laws, I mentioned the laws, are very much responsible for accomplishing that. And so it's a lot of third-party intervention to tell people not to do that. And that sort of reflects really some things that are new in human culture, perhaps not seen so much in other creatures. All right. Well, anyway, let me draw a conclusion here. Culture, I want to say, is humankind's biological strategy. It's our new way of solving the basic biological problems of survival and reproduction. We turn to, we take our sick children to the hospital. We ask the government to give tax breaks for research or to people who have children or whatever. It's been very successful culture, worked very well for us, but requires a lot of advanced psychological traits. And you can say, well, why don't all the creatures take up culture as well? Well, they don't have as many capacities. And so human evolution maybe added some new things, or at least took what small beginning traits in others. I mean, self-control is present in other animals, but needs to be developed much more thoroughly in humans because culture has a lot more rules, a lot more regulations, of the laws and morals and so on. So a lot more needing to override your behavior to bring it into line with standards. Morality in the full-fledged sense, and this I'm going with the cultural materialist view, that culture is a system that basically has to provide for the material and social needs of the individuals, and so regulates behavior for that, and morality comes with it in a full-fledged sense, comes with culture, tells people what to do to override their self-interest and at least their short-term, and follow the system's rules. By conforming to the system, the system works, and then we all live better. But we have to cooperate to a significant degree, and so morality is the set of rules to help us do that. And self-control, then, one of the crucial mechanisms that had to improve in humans to enable culture to succeed. So it's an inner capacity, limited, energy expensive, and so on, to alter your behavior, override responses, and enable one then to change one's behavior to fit in with the requirements of the system so that it'll work. And then free will, again, we see continuity with animals, their choice and agency in other creatures, and free will, perhaps a more advanced form of agency that evolved out of that, more adapted to working in culture, using meaningful reasons and operating within the context of the shared group. It enables the human animal to relate to its social and cultural environment. I mean, a simple way of the basic agency of the squirrel and so on is to enable that little animal to deal with its physical environment, but the free will as an advanced form enables the human being to deal with its cultural environment. And recognizes that as humans we can be somewhat more than animals, control our behavior in these advanced ways, need to make the system work. And once it works for us, then it has provided the immense benefits that it has. Thank you.